The sun was already warming the soil when Doris Reynolds stepped out onto the back porch, her knees stiff from sleep and her fingers itching for her gloves. At 72, the mornings were slower now, but they still carried promise, especially when her garden was calling. Rows of tomato vines stretched across the wooden lattice. Marigolds danced around the corners, little golden soldiers keeping away bugs. And in the very back, near the fence her husband Walter had built decades ago, lay her pride, a patch of roses so vibrant they looked almost fake. She knelt slowly, digging her gloved hands into the soil with care. There was something sacred about the act. The earth had memory, and in it were decades of hers: birthdays, laughter, tears, losses, and quiet victories. Doris didn't need much these days. Just her garden and maybe her morning tea. But peace, as she'd come to learn, was often short-lived. From the kitchen window the voices started again. Her son Brian, now 38, and his wife Tasha, 35, were arguing again. They had been living with Doris for 4 months now, just until things got sorted, as Brian had said. A couple of weeks, tops. That was what he promised, after they sold their apartment and the new one fell through. Doris had smiled and nodded. Of course they could stay. She loved them. She loved her granddaughter Emma too. The house felt warmer with them inside, but lately it had begun to feel crowded. "Mom," Brian called out, stepping onto the porch in sneakers and a wrinkled polo shirt. "Can we talk real quick?" Doris wiped her hands on her apron. "Sure, honey." Tasha followed behind him, arms crossed and phone in hand. She barely looked up. "So," Brian began, rubbing the back of his neck, "we've been having a hard time with parking. Tasha's been having to park on the street. It's a pain." Doris raised an eyebrow. "There's room in the Truvio." "Yeah, but I park there, and you're not using the back garden space for anything practical, really. It's just plants." Tasha had an idea. What if we paved a little bit of that corner near the fence, just a small space for her car? Doris blinked. "You mean the garden? You want to pave the garden?" "Not all of it," Tasha interjected, finally glancing up. "Just the back row. The dirt's already dry. It's not like anything useful grows there." Doris's lips thinned. "There are rose bushes there." Tasha shrugged. Brian laughed awkwardly. "It's just temporary. You won't even notice after a while." Doris didn't answer right away. She looked out across her yard, her heart squeezed tight, but she smiled. "Let me think about it." They nodded and walked back inside, thinking that was a yes. That night, Doris couldn't sleep. She sat in her recliner with an old photo album on her lap. Pictures of the garden from when it was nothing but grass, to the vibrant oasis it had become. There was Walter with his shovel, smiling. Emma as a toddler, muddy and laughing with a tomato in each hand. Even Brian, young and proud, holding up a crooked carrot. Doris traced a photo with her finger. "They don't see it," she whispered to no one. The next morning, she decided to speak clearly. "I'd rather not turn the garden into a parking lot," she told Brian over breakfast. He looked surprised. "It's not the whole garden, just one corner. It's not about size. It's about principle." Tasha, stirring her coffee, rolled her eyes. "It's just dirt. You're being sentimental." "No," Doris said softly. "I'm being honest. That's my space. It's the only thing here that still feels like mine." Tasha got up from the table without finishing her drink. Brian leaned back in his chair. "You're making this difficult, Mom. I've made room for your family and my home, but not at the expense of my peace." And with that, The conversation ended for the moment, but Doris should have known. The following week, while she was at the library, they did it anyway. She returned to find gravel spread over the back corner. A portable cement mixer sat beside a newly flattened space. Her roses gone, torn out, thrown into a black trash bag leaning against the fence like it was nothing. She didn't cry. Not then. She stood silently at the edge of what used to be hers, her garden gloves still in her hand, the sun beating down on her back. When Tasha pulled into the new spot an hour later, stepping out in her designer flats and sunglasses, she smiled. See, so much better. Doris turned and walked inside without a word. That night, Doris opened her filing cabinet and pulled out the thick blue folder labeled Property Records. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside were the original deed papers, a copy of the zoning layout, and the map Walter had drawn up with his meticulous handwriting. She set them on the table beside her tea and opened a fresh notepad. At the top of the page she wrote 4 words. They think it's there, and under that, not anymore. Doris wakes early, not because of the sunrise, though the light does come in gentle over her lace curtains, but because of the weight in her chest. That ache that sits there now, every morning since she saw the gravel and torn-up rose bushes, where her memories used to grow. The smell of fresh cement lingers even through the kitchen window. It's not a garden anymore. It's a driveway. She doesn't water the plants today. There's no need. Half of them are gone, and the rest seem to know they're next. Doris stirs her tea slowly, staring out at the yard. Brian comes into the kitchen, tying his tie with one hand and texting with the other. Morning, he says like nothing happened. Doris looks at him over her glasses. You didn't wait for my answer, he sighs, sliding his phone into his pocket. Mom, we couldn't keep waiting. Tasha needs a place to park. You weren't going to give it, and we had to move forward. You had to kill the roses? He gives her a look. You're acting like they were people. They meant something to me. Brian shakes his head. You're being dramatic. Doris doesn't answer. But in her mind, a door quietly closes, and another one creaks open. That afternoon, Doris walks to the town records office. She hasn't been there in years, not since Walter handled their affairs. Inside, she's greeted by a young woman behind a plexiglass divider. She wears bright lipstick and types quickly. Can I help you, ma'am? I need a copy of the zoning map for 60118 Larchwood Avenue, Doris says, adjusting her purse strap. Do you own the property? Doris smiles softly. I do, still. A few minutes later, she's holding the paper. Her fingers trace the lines. She knew it was true, but seeing it in black and white makes it feel more solid. The garden space isn't technically part of the house lot. It's listed under a separate parcel, something Walter did back when he bought the land, probably for tax reasons. At the time, it meant nothing to Doris. Now, it means everything. That evening, while Brian and Tasha are out at dinner, Doris pulls out the original deed from her folder and compares it with the town map. The garden, what's now a gravel parking spot, is a separate legal entity, a legally distinct section of land. She calls an old friend, Richard Bloom, who used to be a real estate attorney before retiring. Richard, she says after explaining the situation, am I crazy, or do I still have the right to sell that patch of land behind the house? There's a pause, then a small laugh. Doris, you're not crazy at all. The next day, Doris puts in a call to a local real estate investor. A quiet man named Paul Higgins comes by later that week. He walks the property with her, listens to her carefully, and nods with the kind of respect that makes her feel seen. It's a small parcel, he says, but we can do something with it, even if it's just a private garden lot, or a leased patch for solar panels. Believe it or not, these odd little rectangles are in high demand. Doris looks back at the gravel. Can I sell it with terms? Keep the fence up. Ensure no one builds over the flowers if I ever replant. He nods. Absolutely. They shake hands, and Doris goes back inside feeling something she hasn't felt in weeks. Power. That weekend, Tasha hosts a small get-together with some of her friends. Cars line the driveway and of course the new spot behind the fence. Someone compliments the convenience. Best decision we made. Tasha beams. My mother-in-law's yard finally got some use. Doris watches from the porch swing. She doesn't say a word, not when they laugh, not when they pour drinks, not even when one of the guests backs too far and hits the corner of her garden fence. She just rocks gently and smiles because she knows something they don't. On Monday, Doris receives the signed paperwork. The parcel is officially sold. Ownership has transferred. The gravel they're parking on, not theirs anymore. She pins the final contract to the corkboard in her kitchen next to a faded recipe for apple pie and an old note from Walter that says, "Gone fishing, back by lunch." That night she doesn't sleep, she plans. The following morning she makes her move. She walks out to the gravel lot and plants a small wooden sign, "Private property. Trespassing will result in fines." She doesn't need to say more, it's legally true now. Brian spots the sign when he comes home and squints at it. "Mom, what's this?" Doris wipes her hands on a towel. "That's not your land anymore." He laughs like he misheard her. "I sold it," she says calmly, "to a gentleman who wanted some investment property. His team will be fencing it off by next week." "You're joking." "I'm not." Tasha steps outside, her heels clicking. "What the hell is this?" "You paved over my roses without asking, so I sold the ground beneath your tires." Brian stares at her, stunned. You can't do that." "I just did." That night, the house is silent. No one speaks at dinner. Emma asks Grandma, "Why did you put up that sign in the garden?" Doris looks at her granddaughter, the only innocent one in this whole mess, and smiles gently. "Because some things matter, sweetheart, even when people forget why." Emma nods thoughtful. Tasha gets up and leaves the table without finishing her food. The next day, a car arrives. Two men step out with tools and start installing posts for a new fence around the garden lot. They work fast. By afternoon, the parking spot is officially inaccessible. Brian watches from the porch, shoulders slumped. Tasha slams the door behind her when she walks back inside. Doris sits at the kitchen table, sipping tea. The sun streams through the window, and this time she doesn't feel helpless. She feels heard. The posts go in faster than anyone expects. By the time the sun rises on Wednesday, the new fence is nearly complete. It's not tall, just high enough to draw a line between what was taken and what was reclaimed. The wood is a natural cedar, bright and clean, almost glowing in the morning light. The sign remains, "Private property. Trespassers will be fined." Doris steps onto the back porch, wrapped in her gray cardigan, warm mug in hand. She looks at the fence, at the gravel inside it, at the single tire track still visible in the dust. It looks like a scar, but scars mean healing. Brian avoids her most of the day. It's only after dinner that he finally speaks. "Mom," he says, standing in the doorway of the living room, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Doris doesn't look up from her knitting. "Then talk. This whole land war. It's childish." She sets her needles down. "Childish was paving over my roses." He groans. "You can't seriously expect us to find street parking every day." Doris looks at him, and for the first time in a while, her eyes don't soften. "I seriously expect to be respected. That garden wasn't just dirt, Brian. It was where I put pieces of myself after your father passed. It's where I buried his wedding ring, his fishing rod handle, Even his favorite mug. Brian stiffens. She continues, voice quiet but steady. You didn't ask. You didn't care. So I stopped asking too. Later that night, Doris finds a note tucked under her door. Why are you being mean to Dad? He's sad. Love, Emma. It's written in green crayon. Doris sits on her bed and stares at the paper for a long time. Then she folds it gently and places it in her nightstand drawer. Some truths aren't ready for children yet. The next day, Tasha slams a pot onto the stove hard enough to make Doris look up from the newspaper. You're ruining our lives over some stupid plants, she snaps. Doris says nothing. You made your son feel like a failure. You're making me look like a villain. Doris finally speaks, calmly, evenly. I'm not making you look like anything. I'm just letting the truth show. Tasha glares. Well, congratulations. You've turned this into a circus. No, Doris says, turning a page. I turned this into a boundary. The man who bought the land comes by to check the fence. His name is Paul Higgins, and he wears clean jeans and a baseball cap. He tips it politely when Doris answers the door. Miss Reynolds, he says, just checking everything's to your liking. I added a clause in the contract. You'll have shared visual rights to the space. That means you can landscape the inside if you'd like. I remember you mentioned you missed your roses. Doris blinks. I can garden in it again. He nods. Of course, as long as it's understood the land stays separate. I don't mind if you treat it like home. Doris exhales slowly. Then I'll plant lavender this time. Something that doesn't mind dry ground. Paul smiles. Sounds perfect. 2 days later, the mail brings more than bills. It brings a letter from Emma's school. Dear Parent Guardian, it reads, Emma Reynolds recently submitted an art project titled The Fence and the Flowers, which moved our staff deeply. We'd like to invite you and your family to view it at our community art night this Friday. Doris reads it twice. She folds it and places it on the fridge. Then she goes upstairs and takes out a small tin box from the closet. Inside are packets of lavender seeds, some old gardening gloves, and a photo of Walter smiling in that stupid straw hat he always wore when weeding. She holds the photo to her chest, then smiles. Friday comes. Brian doesn't mention the letter. Neither does Tasha. Doris dresses in her best cardigan and skirt and walks herself to the school. Inside the gymnasium, children's paintings and sculptures line folding tables. Paper flowers, handprints, popsicle stick animals, all loud and messy and beautiful. And there in the center row is Emma's display. It's a shoebox diorama, one half covered in gravel and paper cars, the other filled with tiny paper roses in a brown picket fence made from toothpicks. The title card reads, Where Grandma Drew the Line. Doris feels something catch in her throat. A teacher walks by and says, Are you Emma's grandmother? That project had everyone in tears. Doris nods slowly. I suppose it did the same to me. That night, Emma climbs into Doris's lap before bedtime. I didn't mean to make you sad with the note, she says softly. Doris kisses the top of her head. You didn't. You reminded me why I did it. Emma looks up. Because of the roses? No, Doris said. Because people forgot what mattered, and I had to remind them. The next morning, Brian stands at the kitchen counter with 2 coffee mugs. He offers one to Doris. I'm sorry, he says quiet. Doris takes the cup. For what? For not acting, for treating you like a tenant in your own home. She sips. It took offense to make you see it. He nods. I know. Tasha enters the room, still in her robe, hair tied back. I'm not going to apologize for needing a parking spot, she says. Doris doesn't flinch. And I'm not going to apologize for owning the land. Tasha exhales hard. What now? Now, Doris says. I'm planting lavender. In the coming days, Doris returns to her routine. She digs, waters, hums to herself while laying fresh soil inside the fence. It's slow work, her knees ache, her back protests, But every time she kneels in the dirt, she feels less like a ghost in her own life. Emma helps after school. She asks about the difference between seeds and bulbs, how to keep bees away, how long lavender takes to bloom. Why lavender? She asks one day. Because it's soft, Doris replies, but it never stops growing, even when it's cut. The first lavender sprouts break through the soil on a Monday morning. They're tiny, barely there, but unmistakable, pale green fingers reaching up through loose earth, a quiet insistence on life. Doris kneels by the fence with a small trowel in one hand and a watering can in the other. She hums softly. The sun is warm on her back, the smell of moist soil familiar and sacred. Behind her, the sound of a car door slamming breaks the peace. She turns her head just slightly. Tasha, arms folded, heels clicking on the gravel as she walks across the driveway with her phone in hand. "Don't tell me you're actually planning to keep this up," she says, waving a hand toward the fenced garden. "The whole neighborhood's talking." "Let them," Doris replies without turning. Tasha scoffs. "You're making it harder than it has to be." Doris finally looks up. "I'm making it honest." That evening, Brian comes home with a folder under his arm. He sets it down on the kitchen table like it's heavier than it looks. Then he pulls out a chair across from Doris and slides into it. "I had a call with a lawyer today," he says. Doris sips her tea. She explains some things to me about land rights, about how once you sell a parcel, it's legally separated. Doris nods. "That's true." He looks at her. There's a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, fear, shame. "I just didn't think you'd actually go through with it," he murmurs. Doris sets down her mug. "You didn't think I'd draw a line because you forgot who I was," she says. "But I remember. I'm not just someone's mother. I'm a woman who built this house, one shovel at a time, beside your father. And now I'm planting something new, so you never forget again." The next day, a letter arrives in the mailbox. It's from the zoning committee. Tasha applied for an extension to pave more space, to connect the old garden plot to the driveway officially. Doris stares at the paper, her jaw tightening. She folds it once, twice, then 3 times, and puts it in her purse. 2 days later, she walks into the zoning office with her cane tapping softly on the tile floor. Her steps are slow but steady, her shoulders square. The receptionist looks up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Doris says, sliding the folded letter across the counter. "I'm here to dispute this request." The receptionist frowns. "Do you own the adjoining property?" "I don't just own it," Doris says. "I sold it. But I still have visual rights, and there are provisions about physical connections to private lots." The receptionist nods. "Do you have your paperwork?" Doris reaches into her purse and hands her a second envelope, the one Paul Higgins gave her. The woman scans it, eyebrows rising slightly. "This is airtight," Doris smiles. "So is my resolve." Later that week, Paul stops by again. He steps out of his truck holding a clipboard and a small crate of starter plants. "Thought you might like a few extras," he says. "Echinacea sage, a couple bee balms. Good for pollinators." Doris's face softens. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he replies. "After everything you told me about that garden, it felt like I owed the space something." Doris takes the crate, her fingers brushing the soft leaves. "Thank you." Paul hesitates, then says, "You know, there are legal options if they keep pushing. You can file an injunction to keep them from encroaching on your rights." She nods slowly. "I've already spoken to someone." That night, Emma comes into Doris's room carrying a sheet of paper. "It's a poem," she says. "We had to write one about strength." She hands it over shyly. Doris reads aloud. "She grows in silence, like lavender and stone, She doesn't shout, she reclaims her own. They tried to bury her roots with lies. But she bloomed anyway, beneath quiet skies. By the time she finishes, Doris's eyes are wet. Emma curls up beside her and whispers, "You're my favorite flower." The next morning, Doris takes a deep breath and sends a letter of her own, not to the zoning office, but to her lawyer. She wants to revise her will, not to exclude anyone, but to ensure her intentions can't be rewritten. She wants the lavender patch to remain protected. She wants Emma to have something that grows, something that remembers. By the end of the week, Tasha confronts her again. "This is insane," she snaps. "Do you even care what kind of stress this is causing your son?" Doris stands in the doorway of the garden gate. "I care," she says. "That's why I didn't kick you both out. That's why I let you stay even after you paved over my memories." Tasha's voice trembles. "You're trying to embarrass us." "No," Doris says. "You did that yourself." And with that, she closes the gate behind her and kneels back down in the soil. The lavender grows taller. The roots dig deeper. And Doris, with dirt under her fingernails and peace in her spine, tends to every inch of it like a prayer. A silent one, but powerful enough to echo. I'm sitting at the dining table again, pen in hand, reading over a thick envelope from my attorney. The will has been updated. The parcel that used to be my garden, the one I sold to Paul Higgins, is no longer just a transaction. It's now a trust, a legal designation that ensures no one can pave it over again. That land is to remain as is, planted, preserved, and out of reach. Next to that document is another set of pages, the trust I've set up for Emma, a letter from me to her, written in ink and folded neatly inside. I trace her name with my finger and exhale. It feels good, like setting down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. Later that afternoon, Brian finds me in the backyard, sitting beneath the oak tree. He stands there awkwardly, arms crossed, then finally says, "You've changed everything, you know." I look up at him. What exactly did I change? He shrugs. The way people talk about us. The way neighbors look at the house. I nod slowly. Let them look. If they're paying attention, maybe they'll learn something. He sighs and sits beside me. "You were never like this when I was growing up." "No," I say. "Back then, I thought being quiet meant being kind. But kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's surrender." He doesn't argue. Instead, he says something unexpected. "Emma told me she wants to plant a tree with you." My chest warms. "We'll do that." The next morning, I hear gravel crunching under wheels and look out the window. Tasha's mother has arrived, a tall woman, in pearls and a pressed blazer, with a voice that always reminded me of a judge clearing her throat before a sentence. She knocks on my door with the air of someone doing me a favor. I open it and smile gently. "May I come in?" she asks without waiting for an answer. She steps inside, eyes roaming the house like she's taking inventory. "I've heard you've made quite a spectacle of things." I stay quiet. She walks toward the kitchen and turns, arms folded. "You've humiliated my daughter. You've divided this family." "No," I say softly. "Your daughter did that when she mistook ownership for entitlement." Her expression hardens. "You think you're being noble. You're being petty." I walk past her, calmly. "And you think your silence all these years meant wisdom?" "It meant consent." She's stunned, not because of the volume I haven't raised my voice, but because I've stopped letting hers control the room. "You will regret this," she says. "I already regret giving people more chances than they deserved." I reply. That evening, Emma helps me water the lavender. We work in silence until she finally asks, "Did you always love flowers?" I pause, hand on the spout. I loved what they represented, things that bloom even when no one notices. She looks up at me, face scrunched. "That's kind of sad." I smile. "Not really, it means their beauty isn't performative. It's just real." She nods, like she understands something far beyond her years. Then she says, "I'm glad you made space for yourself." And I swear, my heart almost burst. The following day, Paul Higgins visits again. This time with a young couple. "This is Jenna and Marcus," he says. "They're artists. I told them about your garden. They'd love to collaborate, build a small community garden space. Maybe even an outdoor art wall." I blink, surprised. "You think people would come?" "I think they'd grow," he says. I look at the young couple. They smile warmly, holding out mock-up sketches of raised beds and painted fences, bees, butterflies, poems written by kids on the garden fence. It's beautiful, it's unexpected. It's exactly what the space deserves. I nod. "Let's do it." That weekend, the construction team Tasha had hired to pour a new concrete slab shows up early. But they don't get far. The foreman knocks on my door, papers in hand. "Ma'am, there's a zoning hold on this section. We can't legally proceed until it's resolved." I nod. "That's correct, and it won't be resolved." He tips his hat. "Didn't think it would be." They pack up and leave within the hour. Brian finds me in the garden later. He doesn't look angry this time. He looks tired. Maybe humbled. "You were right," he says quietly. I glance up. "I didn't protect you the way I should have. I let Tasha run things because it was easier." "Easier isn't always better," I say. "I know," he whispers. He bends down and begins pulling weeds beside me, not out of duty. Not for show, just to be present. That night, I light a candle in the kitchen, not for ceremony, just because it smells like lavender and old books. I sit down with the final version of my will, my eyes scanning the paragraphs. Emma's name is clear, so is the trust for the land. There's a handwritten note tucked inside that simply reads, "To the girl who noticed, never stop planting things that make people pause, and never let anyone pave over what you love." It's not revenge. It's reclamation. Outside, the wind brushes the lavender stems gently, like applause. And in this house, this home, the roots, finally, feel safe again. The first shovelful of soil smells like memory. Emma is crouched beside me, her tiny gloved hands trying to mimic my movements. And the young couple, Jenna and Marcus, are sketching out the placement for the new trellises. It's been 1 week since I made the deal with Paul Higgins. The lot behind the house, once pounded flat by tires, now crumbles with each dig like it's exhaling for the first time. "Right here?" Emma asks, pointing to a spot near the fence. "Yes, sweet pea, right there." We plant a dogwood tree first. I picked it because it reminds me of my grandmother. Resilient, gentle, quietly elegant. I tell Emma that trees remember who plants them. "Even me?" she asks. "Especially you," I say. Jenna sets down a tray of paints on a makeshift bench. "We're thinking of doing a mural," she says. "Something about growth. Generations." Marcus adds, "Maybe a line of women holding watering cans." I smile. That might make me cry. "You should be in it," Jenna says gently. I nod but say nothing. I'm not sure how to explain that I already feel painted across this land, not in brushstrokes, but in roots. Later that day, Tasha calls Brian. I don't hear the whole conversation, just the end of it. "She did what she had to do," he says. "We'll figure it out." A pause. "No, I'm not asking her to reverse it." Another pause. I said no, Tasha. He hangs up quietly. He doesn't mention it when he joins me in the garden. Just grabs a trowel and starts helping Emma line up flower bulbs. I don't say thank you, but I touch his hand gently. As he passes me the gloves, he understands. That evening, I sit with the will again, the documents, the trust. Everything that once felt so abstract now feels like armor. I glance at the framed photo of Mark on the bookshelf. "I think you'd be proud of me," I whisper. I imagine his reply, something like, You always were braver than you gave yourself credit for." I let the silence answer for him. The next morning, I wake up to find a letter slid under my door. No name, just a folded page with tight handwriting. "You've ruined everything for your family, for a garden. You think you've won, but you've only made yourself irrelevant." No signature, but I recognize the tone. It's Tasha's mother. Of course it is. I fold the letter once, twice, then place it in the trash without reading it again. Irrelevant. Funny how some people only say that once they realize they can't control you anymore. Emma brings me a picture she's drawn. It's a crayon sketch of a garden with stick figures. One has white hair and a long skirt. That one is watering sunflower. "This is you," she says proudly. "And who's this?" I ask, pointing to the smallest figure. "That's me," she says. "But in the future, when I have my own garden." I press the paper to my chest. "You'll have a beautiful one," I say. By the end of the week, the garden is taking shape. Raised beds filled with compost, trellises going up, a small wooden sign painted by Emma that reads, "Nana's Roots." The mural is halfway done. Jenna paints slowly, carefully, crafting images of women holding tools and flowers. One of them looks just like me. The cardigan, the skirt, the silver hair pulled gently back. When I see it, I have to turn away before the tears come. Not out of sadness, but because someone saw me clearly, maybe for the first time. Brian comes out with lemonade. "We should have done this a long time ago," he says, handing me a glass. "Better late than never," I reply. He watches Emma chase a butterfly. "You've given her something she'll never forget." I nod. "She's the reason I couldn't stay silent." Brian looks at me, then at the mural, then at the garden blooming behind us. "You didn't just plant flowers," he says. "You planted a future." And for once, I believe him. That night, I sit on the porch and write a letter. Not to Brian or Tasha, or even Emma, but to myself. "Dear me. You spent years thinking you needed to stay mile to keep the peace. You let others speak for you, shape you, shrink you. But the roots always remembered who they belong to. You are not petty. You are not irrelevant. You are a woman who fought to be seen and planted something beautiful in the process." I fold it and slip it into my journal. A memory, a seed. The next morning, the neighborhood kids arrive to help paint stepping stones. There's music, laughter, dirt under everyone's nail. Even the older neighbors stop by. Some with suspicious eyes, others with admiration. "You really turned this around," one of them says. "I thought it was just going to be another driveway." I shrug. They underestimated what grows when you leave the soil alone. In the middle of the garden, I stand for a moment. Emma runs up and grabs my hand. "Tell me again how trees remember," she says. I look at the young dogwood tree we planted. "They remember love," I say. "They remember hands, and they remember who gave them space to grow." She leans her head against my side, and I know then, no matter what happens to the house, the neighbors, or even my name, this garden will always carry mine in silence. In every bloom, in every root, the garden becomes a community by accident. What starts with a few wildflowers and a dogwood tree turns into something alive, not just in petals and green leaves, but in laughter, in hands extended with watering cans, in the quiet companionship of people who show up just because. Jenna and Marcus bring their friends, college students, artists, quiet dreamers, with paint-splattered jeans and calloused hands. The mural stretches further than planned now, crawling across the back fence with women of all shapes, all skin tones, all ages, each one doing something simple, planting, pruning, holding the sun in their palms. The one that looks like me is finished. Her eyes are closed, peaceful, not because she's resting, but because she's finally rooted. Brian stops by every morning now. He pretends it's to help water, but I know he just wants to be near the garden. He watches Emma chase butterflies and listens as she names each flower we've planted. That one's Nana's rose, she says, pointing to the bush that bloomed early. Unexpected, stubborn. Brian smiles. You named it after her? Emma looks confused. It is her, and I have to look away, pretending to fix the soil, because my eyes are too full. The letter arrives in a yellow envelope, with no return address. Inside is a single page, typed formal. As you are aware, the remainder of your property is under shared interest with your family. This communication is to notify you that we are pursuing legal options to challenge the recent sale and claim breach of family trust. I don't need to ask who sent it. It has Tasha's fingerprints all over it. I show it to Brian. He reads it, jaw tight. She's really going to try to sue you. I shake my head. She'll try to scare me, but she won't win. He nods. You want me to talk to her? No, I say softly. Let her write, let her twist herself in legal knots. I'm done speaking in rooms where I'm only heard as noise. I visit my lawyer that afternoon. Judith Evans welcomes me with a knowing look and a cup of chamomile tea. She sent it, I say. Judith doesn't even need to read it to know who I mean. I was expecting this, she says, flipping open a folder. But your documentation is airtight. The property you sold was legally separated years ago when you paid the back taxes and refinanced. Their claim won't hold. I let out a long breath. Good. Judith leans in. Do you want me to draft a response? I nod. But don't be harsh, just definitive. She smiles, a polite fortress. Exactly. Back at home, Emma shows me her latest sketch. It's a picture of the mural, but she's added one more figure to the row of women. A little girl with pigtails, holding a tiny trowel. That's me, she says, helping. I place my hand on her drawing. You are, and not just with flowers, with remembrance. That weekend we hold a small garden celebration. Not a party, more like a quiet gathering. Neighbors bring lemonade, fruit pies, and stories. We walk the rows of blooms. Someone plays soft guitar on the porch. Emma wears a paper crown, someone made from sunflower leaves. One of the older neighbors, a retired teacher named Mrs. Collins, pulls me aside. You've built something real here, she says. Something lasting. Most people your age are fading. You're blooming. I laugh. Some of us just needed the right soil. Later that evening, Brian helps me bring the dishes inside. He pauses in the kitchen, wiping his hands. Mom, I've been thinking about the will. I set down the tray. Yes? I want Emma to inherit this place. Not just the house. The garden. The spirit of it. I nod. So do I. He hesitates. Then I want to make it legal. I want to co-sign whatever you draft. I know it's your trust, but I don't want Tasha's name anywhere near it. When you're gone, the pain in his voice isn't cruel, it's protective. Tired. I rest my hand on his. We'll make sure the right hands hold the future, I say. And for once, we're aligned. That night, I return to my journal. Emma, if one day you read this, know that everything I did wasn't to punish. It was to preserve. You're growing up in a world where people measure worth by productivity, by inheritance, by control. Don't believe them. Worth lives in kindness, in flowers, in spaces where little girls feel safe enough to plant something and believe it will grow. You are my legacy, not the land, not the trust. I place the journal beside the photo of Mark and whisper to the dark, she'll be okay. The next morning, the letter from Judith arrives. Polite, firm, ironclad. It ends with a single line that makes me smile. No further contact is necessary unless initiated by our client. Tasha doesn't write again. She doesn't need to. I've already written the ending myself. The mural is almost finished. The final brushstroke goes on my image. A strand of silver hair falling over the shoulder. Jenna steps back, arms folded. I think it's perfect, she says. I look at the wall and feel something strange. Like I'm seeing my obituary before I die. But not in a morbid way, in a way that says, she was here. She mattered, and that's all I ever wanted. The news hits the town on a Thursday morning. The development deal is dead. Tasha's plans for expansion, the permit for the garage, the contractor who had been circling like a vulture, all gone. Scrap, vanished like smoke on a breeze. Turns out the city didn't appreciate someone lying on grant applications, or conveniently forgetting that a portion of the land was already resold, especially when that land had now been declared a protected community space, thanks to a few kind voices who signed a petition. Jenna started. I never raised my voice once. Turns out silence has its own volume. Tasha doesn't call. She doesn't write again. She just disappears behind the bitterness of her own plans, forced to watch from afar as the soil she ignored becomes something sacred. Her name becomes a warning, not a legacy. Brian hears from a cousin that she's shocked. I went through with everything. I only smile. Shocked, after all the years they treated me like a garden statue, something nice to glance at, but never listened to. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. We hold a final mural unveiling on a Saturday. The garden glows with light. Strings of bulbs. Lanterns made from mason jars. Candles flickering like stars. Emma walks through the crowd with a clipboard and a basket of seed packets she's handing out to neighbors. It's our thank you, she says to a woman in a denim jacket. You helped grow this too. People bring their families. Old neighbors I haven't seen in years show up just to see if the rumors were true. The rumor that the old woman down on Larchmont didn't give in. The one that says she made something beautiful where concrete was supposed to go. Jenna asks me to say something. I hesitate. I've spoken enough in my life to know that words don't always move people. But then I look around, at the mural, at the garden beds, at Emma. So I step forward and speak from the center of my rib. I didn't grow up thinking I'd become someone who had to fight for her own home. I begin. I thought family meant safety. I thought love was enough. A few nods from the crowd. But sometimes we have to remind people who we are. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with boundaries, with beauty, with blooming where no one expected us to. I pause. This garden was never just about flowers. It was about putting roots back where they tried to dig them up. It was about showing my granddaughter that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that no one gets to erase you from your own land. The applause is quiet, not loud, but warm, like sunlight. After the crowd thins, I sit in my favorite chair beneath the dogwood tree. Emma curls beside me, resting her head on my arm. Nana, she asks, yeah, will I get to keep this garden forever? I look around. At the way the moonlight touches the mural. At the way the earth still smells of lavender and fresh mulch. At least as long as you protect it, I say. But even if the flowers go, the roots are in you now. She thinks about that, then says, can I paint more flowers on the fence? I laugh. As many as you want. A few weeks later, I visit the lawyer one last time. Judith has the new trust documents prepared. The home is now in a protected family foundation, structured to preserve both the house and garden as a community green space. After I'm gone, Emma's name is listed as heir. Judith says, tapping the final line, and no one else has power to revoke it. I sign the last page with steady hands. Judith looks at me kindly. You know, most people your age just let the kids take over. I smile. Most people my age didn't get nearly taken out with a zoning request and a parking meter. We both laugh, but we both know this was never just about property. It was about permanence. That evening, Brian and I sit on the porch, watching the sun dip low. He sips iced tea and says, "You know, I used to think you were just fragile." I look at him. He continues, "I thought age meant you couldn't do things like this. Stand up. Push back." "You mean think," I say. He winces. "Yeah, I thought you couldn't outthink us." "I didn't outthink anyone," I reply. "I just stopped waiting for someone to value what I knew." He nods. "I'm sorry." I place my hand on his. "Make it up to me by helping Emma plant those daisies tomorrow." A final journal entry. Mark. I didn't need a big win, just a place that was mine again. I didn't need applause. Just a moment of stillness where no one questioned whether I belonged. I didn't need revenge. Just a garden, and a girl who would grow up knowing that strength isn't noise. It's knowing when to stay put, and when to dig. In the spring, the mural is featured in the city newsletter. The headline reads, "From pavement plans to petunias. One woman's quiet stand." I clip it out and tuck it in the back of my journal. Emma finds it later and adds it to her scrapbook. Legacy doesn't need marble. Sometimes it only needs roots.